morning. In this occasion, we will discuss a little about the Second World War and for our discovery project in English assignment. We are going to interview our expert, the Dr. Daniela Navarrete.
Hello.
Hello.
I don't hear much. I don't see you much.
Who is an historian. As you will know, the impact of the Second World War has been in different areas, but we are here looking for the opinion of an expert about these events. And our first question is how the Second World War has impact on subdeveloped countries.
Well, as you know, this conflict began yes, in Europe in 1939, and it affected the other rest or the other countries in the planet, specifically in terms of commerce. The commerce routes were interrupted by the conflict, especially when the conflict spread from Europe to other continents, such as North Africa, the Middle East, the Pacific Ocean, and its islands, especially when Japan, one of the countries in conflict, attacked the port of Pearl Harbor, which is an island. It belonged to islands of the United States of America. So specifically, the commerce routes were interrupted, the trade, the world trade was affected, but also involved the participation of people from all over the world in different ways. For example, the participation of the Great Britain, which was a colonial country, included the participation of all its inhabitants, such as people from Australia, from New Zealand, from Canada, from all over the world, because of the Commonwealth of the Great Britain. Also, there was this scheme of alliances that involved other people. For example, Germany, one of the main actors of the World War II, was an ally of Italy, and they also were allies with other countries in the Middle East. So this involved every time more and more countries, therefore more people.
Thank you. And the second considers that the Second World War increased levels of poverty.
Oh, absolutely. Especially during the conflict and after the conflict. I'm thinking about the artist who has portrayed the sufferance of the people, such as painters or dramatic plays, who has portrayed all the sufferance that the war brought. And more recent media, such as cinema, they portrayed, especially in Italy, there was a whole movement called New Social Cinema, with very famous directors such as Vittorio Da Sica, who portrayed the reality and the sufferance of the populations, not only because they sent their sons to the battle, but also because they suffered the invasion, the attacks, the poverty, children in the street, destruction of hospitals, of fields, labor fields in the countryside. So the movies are a good resource to see what was the extension of the sufferance after the wars.
You say something about the infrastructure. Consider that the Second World War has a serious impact on the infrastructure of common areas such as schools and hospitals.
Oh, well, yes, of course, not only schools, hospitals, but roads, ports, industrial facilities, entire cities were devastated in Germany, in Italy, in France, in England. I'm saying, well, the worst happened in Japan, no, with the drop of the nuclear bomb, where you lost 500 people just with one single bomb in one city. So this was the the destruction World War II caused showed to the humanity all the level of progress that can be achieved when you put the progress in the wrong path. I'm saying that the humanity or the Western civilization have known a great deal of progress, understood as a positive thing. You know, the 19th century was the century of the Industrial Revolution, with so many things achieved for the good of the humanity. But unfortunately, when you deprive the progress of human ends, of sensibility, I'm saying spirituality even, then you have the results the World War II had. Oh, now we have music in the background.
You think that the Second World War has an impact on today's economy?
Absolutely. After the World War II, the Western societies came to and understood not only not to go to this kind of events, of conflicts, but also how to prevent wars. And one of the ways to prevent wars is specifically that progress has to be spread among the entire world, not only few countries. That's why the United Nations was created in 1945, precisely at the end of World War II. And one of the goals of the United Nations is to promote development. This is the moment when this word was created, development. With development, with access to equal development in the entire world, wars can be prevented. That's why the United Nations has many agencies to promote development. Because development is the key to avoid wars in the world.
You mentioned something about the United Nations that promote the development. You think that the Second World War has brought some progress from the present, and how?
Well, it was a lesson. World War II was a lesson of the failure of a previous organization called the League of the Society of Nations. The Society of Nations was created after World War I in 1919. And it failed mainly because the countries were not committed to prevent or to share or to forgive the reasons why World War I happened, which was also a terrible war. The level of destruction, of mass destruction, because there has always been wars in the history of humanity. But what got worse, what really got worse in the 20th century is the capacity of destruction achieved by scientists and industrials. before you had a weapon that could cause harm manually. It means that you needed a person, a man, to carry that weapon and go and kill as many people he could by hand, helped by the weapon. But in the 19th century, you have machine guns invented. It's industrial death, sort of speaking. So one person could cause thousands of killings in few hours. So that was the main difference between the wars on the 20th century and the wars before. And this was achieved, or if we can say achieved, because the scientific and industrial means were serving the mass destruction.
Okay, we know that there are many reasons for the war start.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think, or what do you consider that to be a reason in our days to repeat a war?
Well, basically, the reasons have not changed in thousands of years. Economical power has a lot to do, if not all to do, with these reasons or causes for the wars. And because a country, I'm saying United States, they use their military power to overwhelm or to intimidate other countries that are defying that economical power. Take, for instance, the case with North Korea. Well, North Korea is far from defying the power of the United States in terms of anything, economics, military. Well, in military they are defined. But the thing is that North Korea responds to another power, which is, do you know what power North Korea responds to? They obey to another power. It's not the United States, obviously. Do you know who? What country? Do they-
Russia?
Russia?
No, but it's near Russia. It starts with a C. CH. And this is
China.
Yeah, exactly. China. North Korea responds to China. And China represents a huge defiance for the United States, both economic and military power. Exactly. And Russia also plays a role in that, as usual. So you see, all it's set. All the conditions are set to start a conflict any minute, because you have this game of alliances with big powers, world powers, and how they start this game like chess with allies in different places of the country, of the world. I think the United Nations has helped to prevent some of these conflicts. I also believe, not all of them, but they have prevented some of them. And somehow the education has to do with the actions of the leaders. And but at the end, the economic reasons will be because it's the survival of the economy, the survival of one or another society. It's a matter of survival. So this will always happen.
So we are talking about most of Europe and United States. So we live in Latin America, right? So do you think that in Latin America will be a war like this magnitude for example, the economy and the resources?
Well, Latin America, it's a geopolitical strategic point of the planet. And by Latin America, I'll specify Central America. There is a facility that allows the world trade from north to south, from east to west. What facility I'm talking about in Central America that enhances the trade, the commerce all over the world. Do you know what place I'm talking about? Exactly. Panama and its channel. And this has been a reality since the channel was built. It means that during the World War II that you are asking about, it was a point of big concern, specifically for the United States, because the Germans also had intentions and interests both in the Panama Channel and also in South America, Argentina and Chile. Because if they couldn't get to use the Panama Channel, they had to border the continents in the south. Why? Well, to get some help for the Japanese, their allies in the Pacific War. As they did. They sent submarines and U-boats in all that area, in all that coast. The Nazis were not only interested in Latin America to get connected with their allies in the Pacific, but also they were thinking on a plan B. And what a plan B was. In case of defeat, they had to flee Europe. They had to leave Europe and hide. And where to hide? Well, the history shows us that they hide precisely in South America, Brazil, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Argentina. So this was part of the conflict during the 1960s and 70s. I think even during the 1980s, we have the last raids of the Mossad. It means the Israeli intelligence, chasing the former Nazi leaders that executed millions of Jews in the concentration camps, like Klaus Barbie, like Mengele, well, he died before, and Eichmann. Eichmann was caught in Argentina, and he was pulled to Jerusalem for a trial.
Yes. What could you say as a historian about the impact of this war on countries like, for example, United States, Germany, Russia, that are in the top of the economy and on all the things?
Well, after World War II, the United States was the sole leader of the war. You could say, oh, that's fine, they won the war, so they could rule the war as they please. Well, believe it or not, this was not good for the United States because they need the market to expand. Once again, economy. So they needed more consumers to sell their products. And many of those consumers were in Europe before. But because Europe was destroyed by World War II, they had to figure out how to recover the market, therefore the society. And that's why they created a thing called the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was the answer for the American need to restore the market in Europe. So Europe was rebuilt by the United States in the decades after the World War II. And so you can see that there was an action taken immediately after the end of the war.
And what do you think would have happened if the war had not taken place?
Well, in history, we don't like to make those questions, because when things happen, that's all the thing we have to reflect about or to think about. No, well, there is no worse. I'm not sure if the word exists in English. Nostalgia than being nostalgic about something that didn't happen. So the war happened, and it was horrible. It caused more than 40 million killing death during the entire event. And some of those people were killed. Well, killing has no reasons. There is no reasonability between killing but some of the reasons were or started long before, in the 19th century, like nationalism, like colonialism, and all ways of exploitation to other human beings, and also any way that make believe in society that they were better than others. So racism. And unfortunately, those phenomena, they still exist in many Western societies, but not only, also the Middle East. I think it was unavoidable. It was going to happen. There was no reason. People make mistakes thinking that World War II happened only because of Adolf Hitler. That's a big mistake. Germany was one of the superpowers of the Western civilization in terms of economy, education, infrastructure. There was no poverty, there was no underdevelopment, there was no exploitation. Why Germany? People don't reason enough, don't think enough about why Germany. It was a high society. Why did they do that? Why 80 million Germans follow Adolf Hitler? How do you explain that? It's not one person, it's 80 million following that person. Sadly, we see that people often forget about the real reasons of World War II, and they use it as a pretext. Hannah Arendt called that the banality of evil. We just underestimate the real causes, the real reasons that can lead people, entire societies, to a war. Relativism is one of them, but we don't talk about it. The lack of values, the lack of respect for the human being. Last year, 2016, I was watching a documentary, a German documentary about science. And there was this young biologist, German biologist, saying that he didn't understand why he was not allowed to make any experiments in human beings. The same way he was doing it with fishes. A German biologist say that in just last year, 2016, that he didn't like the church because they prevented the scientists to carry out experiments in human babies, unborn babies. And for him, it was no difference between a fish or an unborn baby.
So, last one.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about reasons. So, so do you think that the reason it started the war could have been solved differently to prevent the war, or without a war?
Well, it's a combination. You have to understand that politicians, they don't decide a war. The economic powers, most of the time, they decide the war. They have a great deal on that decision. So a politician is placed in its power, in its political place, by the economical powers most of the time, or they receive a lot of pressure from the bankers, from the industrial. But how to convince, it's not the bankers that go to the war and go and die in a war. How to convince the population that will fight the war that they have to go and do it. Then you use other topics that the masses will follow, such as all this nationalism, religion, mainly. Those are the two flags used to conduct a society to war. So they accept to die for a country. Okay, so nationalism is very important. That's why we get indoctrinated since we are in the school. To love your country and your flag and your anthem. And most of the lyrics of our anthem say that we must be prepared to die for the nation, for the country. So that's the tool the politician uses to respond to its master.
So
we needed the war. World War II was necessary for the capitalism of the time, for the greed. I'm not saying there were the good reasons. There were no good reasons in a war. But the expansion of the markets were demanding that horrible thing. I think they didn't expect that horror the way it happened. But they provoked it totally.
So, as we hear, we know more for the World War II, and we know some things, topics, and for example, that the reasons for why the World War happened, or that, as Dr. Navarrete said, we need the war for our society, and maybe if the World War didn't happen, we don't have the society that we have right now. So, thank you to our expert, Dr. Navarrete, to answer all these questions and to give us more information for the World War.
You're welcome. Bye.